in this video, I'm going to show you some basic watercolor techniques so you can be successful at adding color to your bedroom drawing in one-point perspective. So by now you should have your details done. You don't want to start painting until you're done getting everything in the room that you want in there. The first thing I'm going to show you is just how kind of watercolor behaves on the paper. So there's two ways of going about doing it. There's painting wet on dry. And so when you paint wet on dry, if you get your paint and then you put a paint stroke on the paper, you've got wet paint on dry paper. And what happens is the water dries quickly, and so anytime you have an edge there, it's going to dry pretty quick. And then once you try to go back and blend or add another layer, then you're going to have some edges that won't quite go away. We're using pretty good quality watercolor paper here, so that is wet on dry. Now when we start doing tiny details, then painting wet on dry is helpful, because then you can go in and control the paint a little bit better in these smaller areas. You can take a smaller paintbrush and you can kind of control here where the paint goes in these smaller areas. Okay, but the first thing I want to do is create some watercolor washes. And we have some different size paint brushes here in our classroom. We have these little wide brushes, we have some smaller detail brushes, we have some we have some medium sized brushes. So when we create a watercolor wash, what we'll do is wet the paper first. And wherever the paper is wet, the paint is going to go. So if I put watercolor in that area and I tilt it, let's add a little bit more paint here. Okay, so if I tilt this, it's going to run where the paper is wet. Okay, you see where the paper is wet? It's not going to go into the area that's dry. So this is helpful when we want to control the watercolor paint. We're going to start out by creating large areas of watercolor washes. And I want you to gradually build up the color. If I just take super dark paint and start painting, it's really going to take away from the artwork if I use really dark values. Okay, and what I mean by values is when I have my watercolor paint here, if I get a lot of pigment, okay, it's a darker value. But when I rinse my brush and then start to blend and pull just a little bit of pigment over, then we have a lighter wash of color. It's easier to build up your color and get gradually darker than to paint it all dark and try to reverse it and get it lighter. Okay, so that's why today, and I'm going to show you in just a minute, we're going to focus on creating watercolor washes, and then we'll let it dry, and then as the area is dry, then we can go back in and put darker detailed areas by painting the wet on dry. Now, if you do mess up, here's this area of dark that I added earlier. Here's what you can do. If you have an uh-oh moment and you're like, oh no, I need to get that off of there, rinse your brush out, take some clean water, okay, gently loosen it up with some clean water, and then you can take a towel or a tissue and lift it up. It's not completely gone, but you can fix some of your uh-oh moments with just some clean water, okay? Just kind of lift it up and mop it up with a paper towel. Let's get started, and we want to make sure that we have some paper towels handy. Here's how I want you to set up your watercolor area. So you should have a paper towel, okay? I like to fold it up and just have it handy to the side. And the reason you'll do this is because when you have your water, sometimes you're going to want to, you'll hear me say this a lot, rinse, dab, okay, and soften. rinse, dab, and soften. You'll hear me say that all the time as we're doing acrylic paintings. When y'all get up into Art 2, Art 3, we're going to do some oil paintings. So rinse, dab, and soften. So you'll need your paints, you'll need your water, a paper towel handy, and your brushes. Okay, so if your paints are dry, what I want you to do, and I do have a spray bottle I need to bring up here to do this. If you have a little spray bottle, you can just mist water over your watercolors and activate them. You want to make sure you're dripping clean water. And so that'll go ahead and let your watercolors start moistening up, and they'll be ready to pull pigment out of the pan. If you have Crayola brand watercolors, these pigments are really strong. So you'll notice that if I have an area of water and I just take a little bit of blue, it's still going to be really pretty strong. Okay, see how strong that is? That was just a tiny dot of paint. So here we go. We want to paint one area at a time and keep the water in that area. So the best place to start, I think, is maybe on this back wall. Just kind of go around these details a little bit. And you'll start to notice, you can tell where it's wet because the light will reflect and it will appear shiny. Remember, the paint is going to go where it's wet, so start practicing controlling where you're putting water, and then it'll just make it that much easier to control where you're putting the paint. You want to mix colors with your watercolors. You can certainly do that. If I want my walls to be a light beige color, I can take some brown. I just have a styrofoam plate here. Rinse your brush before you dip into a different color. You can add a little bit of yellow maybe. I'm going for a light beige color. I suppose we could add a little bit of white. Definitely want to clean your brush each time. Okay, so you can mix. Uh-oh, see, I just contaminated my white. If you contaminate a color, rinse out your cup or your brush really well. Take the clean water. You can dab the water out of your brush. You can kind of mop some of it out of there, but you can also take a clean little towel and just kind of dab it, okay? Get that other color out of there. Try to keep your watercolor pans nice and pure so that it doesn't look like the little elementary kids are using them. You know, there's nothing worse than trying to use yellow when there's black and all sorts of colors mixed in with it. Okay, so here I have a new color that I'm going to use, and I have painted this area wet. So I will just start brushing some of this light beige color. I want my walls to be pretty light, and I recommend keeping your walls light for this project because then you will be able to have your details stand out. Put the emphasis on your details, not big, dark, monstrous walls. So this watercolor paper will start to buckle a little bit. It'll start to kind of ripple up, but that's all right. It will flatten back out as it dries. If you need to, you can switch to a smaller brush to get in between some of these smaller areas. So this is going to end up being an ink and watercolor painting. It will actually be considered mixed media because we'll have both medias of watercolor paint and ink. All right, so now I have this wall. What's going to happen if I paint this wall while that one's still wet? Yeah, it's going to bleed into it. So I'm going to let that wall dry. while I go to another area that is not next to that area, not touching that area, and I'll create another wash. So I bet I can go ahead and come over here on the comforter. Now if your water gets really dirty in your cup, then you can go over there and dump it out and get some clean water. You'll start to notice when your water's getting really dirty, because when you wet your paper, it'll start to be contaminated and yucky. So my bedspread is going to be, when I'm doing oil paintings, I like to mix purple and brown for some reason. It makes a really nice color. Kind of a plum color. So let me test it out. That's pretty dark, so I'm gonna rinse my brush out. Rinse, dab, and y'all remember? Soften.
Oh yeah.
So if you get too much water, it's starting to puddle up right there. Dab your brush, get the water out, mop up some of that water, dab it, mop it, dab it, and then start to pick up more pigment and spread it around. I'm actually going to paint my polka dots darker than this, so I'm just letting this color go into my polka dots because they're going to be a little bit darker than the background color of this. Okay. Rinse, dab out the extra water. So now I think I'll move over here to the dresser and create a wash of brown color over here. I think I'll go for earth tones in this bedroom. Now this brown is really strong, so I'm gonna just pick up a tiny dot of paint. Yes, that's a nice room. I love those magazines because they give you a color palette to work from. In fact, if you're not sure what colors you want to paint your bedroom project, you can look through those magazines and look for some color schemes for your room.
I like this one.
Okay. All right, so now this is pretty wet, and let's see, I taped down the bottom of this so it would stay still, but if I lift this up, you can see kind of more of the color. When I put it back down, there's a glare on it. It's a little bit hard to see. Go ahead and start creating your washes of color, and I'll meet you back here in just a little bit and explain how you will go back and paint wet on dry to start adding darker color values and adding some shadows and to create more three-dimensional areas in your painting. All right. Once everything is painted with your light washes, then you can start to go back with wet paint on dry paper. So this is where you take just a little bit of water and a little bit of paint, just a little bit, and then you can start to add in darker colors. Okay, not super dark. Okay, still light and gradually building up your colors, but you can control the paint by just gradually painting in your detailed areas, cutting around your corners and your small details. And then we can imagine the light coming in from the right through the window, and we can start to create some darker color values. So I was painting my headboard with this brown color, and we can darken brown with blue, or oops, I'm contaminating my colors. It's easy to do because you start rushing through. Get that black out of there. Okay, so here on my plate I've added some blue to my brown, and then I can come in here, and on the left side of these little posts, then I might have more of a shadow. Rinse, dab, and then maybe I can pull the shadow. Well, that just lifted it off. And then this is dry, so now I can take a darker color. That's a little bit too purple, so I think I'll go ahead and add my brown. I want it to be kind of a dark plum color. So now I can paint in these polka dots without it bleeding into the adjacent areas. What does adjacent mean? I'll remember.
Beside.
Right beside it. Next to it, touching it. Okay, so the end of this bed that turns the corner here, and if this were just a basic block, we would know that this front side would be shadowed a little bit because the window is hitting the side of the bed and the top and making this side a little bit darker. So I could take a little bit darker color mixture and when this turns the corner, make it slightly darker. So just imagining the light and shadow. Might also be some little shadow areas under these pillows. Okay, I don't want a hard edge right there, so I'm going to rinse, dab, and soften. Soften the edge. See how I do that? I don't want to soften the edge of my polka dot, I just want to soften the edge of this shadow. So rinse, dab, get that water off of the brush, and soften. Okay, so then probably gonna have this background also on this side of the bed be a little bit more in the shadow. So you can gradually build up your color values darker in those areas in your drawing. Your bedroom drawing will take on a more three-dimensional effect. So see, this is gradually getting darker here. The light is coming in from the windows, spilling across the bed, and we've got some darker values. We also can do it on the floor. I'm not sure what my rug will be yet, but I know that the floor will be slightly darker over here on this side. Behind the dresser or underneath the dresser, we might have some darker casting shadow. Rinse, dab, soften right here. Little darker shadow underneath the edge. Dab, time. I just dabbed it. Soft. Okay. So just continue going throughout your painting, adding more color values, trying to pay attention to where the shadows would naturally be, and creating some 3D and creating more three-dimensional looks on your objects. All right, so I'll go ahead and finish this. If you have any questions, let me know. Maybe I can take a darker blue and put it in here. Maybe I can make this pillow kind of a darker color. Now, the lampshade is a cylinder, right? So if you've got a little cylinder, watch what you can do. This is on dry paper, okay? Look, it's dark. I'm painting dark pigment on the left side because the light is coming in from the window from the right. Rinse, dab, and soften. And what I mean by that is, look, you pull this over and make it lighter on the right side of your cylinder. Okay? Maybe this lamp can be this color. So it's dark on the left side of that cylinder. Dab the brush off. Take a dry brush. That way it's lighter on the right side of that cylinder. So painting wet on dry paper for the details gives you more control, but you're just using a little bit of paint at a time. If you just go in there and use a whole bunch of water and paint, you're gonna just have an explosion of a mess of watercolor paint, okay? So you can always add more paint and darker colors, but you can't always get it off. However, if you do have a mess up, like let's say that I'm painting this and I'm like, oh no, I got paint on there and I don't want it right there. All you gotta do, get clean water, kind of scrub it a little bit, take your paper towel and dab it off. Sometimes you can't get it all off, but most of the time you can get most of it off, so where you can't really see it anymore. All right, so if you've noticed I've accidentally been dripping water, that's something that you want to look out for, because it will definitely create something that's called a bloom in your watercolor painting, and it's definitely not something that you want if you've worked hard to keep an area nice with smooth color. All right, so now we have our color values, we have details, and then the last thing we'll do is add the ink. We'll use a Sharpie and we'll bring out our details, and that will be it. Thanks for watching.